Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The air in the General Hospital administrative offices was always different from the rest of the hospital. It lacked the frantic, life-or-death energy of the ER, the hushed, hopeful anxiety of the maternity ward, or the steady, determined compassion of the oncology floor. Here, the air was still, cool, and processed, smelling of lemon-scented disinfectant and freshly printed paper. It was a place of budgets, personnel files, and strategic planning, a world of quiet power plays where careers were made and broken not with a scalpel, but with a signature on a memo. It was in this sterile environment that Tracy, administrative coordinator for the Chief of Staff's office, had carved out her little kingdom. For 7 years, she had been the unshakable, efficient, and seemingly indispensable right hand to 2 successive chiefs. She knew where every body was buried, every procedural loophole, every unspoken rule. She managed schedules with the precision of an air traffic controller, navigated hospital politics with the cunning of a seasoned diplomat, and guarded her boss's time like a dragon hoarding gold. Her dismissal, therefore, sent not a ripple, but a seismic shock through the administrative corps. The official reason, as whispered over coffee in the cafeteria and typed furiously in private chat windows, was a persistent failure to adhere to updated data entry protocols leading to a significant discrepancy in surgical supply inventory. It was a bland, corporate phrase that hid a multitude of sins. The truth, as it always does at General Hospital, was far more nuanced. Tracy's downfall was not one catastrophic error, but a slow, insidious accumulation of small rebellions. She had clashed one too many times with the new chief of staff, a man named Martin Sable, who had been brought in from a large corporate healthcare chain to streamline operations and maximize efficiency. Sable was a man of systems, algorithms, and key performance indicators. Tracy was a woman of intuition, relationships, and institutional memory. She believed she knew what was best for the hospital, a belief forged in the fires of daily crises that Sable only ever saw as reports on his desk. The final straw had been the Patterson account. Sable had mandated a new, centralized digital filing system for all vendor contracts. Tracy, who had managed the Patterson account, the hospital's primary supplier of surgical instruments, for years, found the new system clunky and inefficient. She believed, not without reason, that its labyrinthine digital signature process would delay a critical order for specialized cardiac surgery clamps. So, she bypassed it. She called her old contact at Patterson, secured the order with a verbal agreement and a handshake over the phone, and filed the paperwork the old way, intending to backdate the digital entry later. She was caught, of course. The system's automated audit flags went up immediately. Sable didn't see a dedicated employee averting a potential crisis, he saw an insubordinate relic refusing to adapt, undermining his authority, and creating a liability for the hospital. He called her into his office, a room with a breathtaking view of the city that somehow felt as cold as a morgue. The conversation was brief and brutal. There was no shouting, no drama. Just the cold, hard language of corporate policy violation. Your actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, demonstrate a fundamental disregard for established protocol, Tracy, Sable had said, his voice devoid of inflection. In an organization of this size and complexity, we cannot have individuals deciding which rules to follow. The system is only as strong as its weakest adherence point. Tracy had argued, her voice tight with a mixture of fury and desperation. She spoke of the patients, of the surgeons who needed those clamps, of her 7 years of flawless service. Sable listened, his expression unchanging. He then slid a single sheet of paper across the vast, polished surface of his desk. Her termination letter. Security would escort her to her desk to collect her personal effects. The news spread through the hospital's gossip vine with viral speed. Nurses and orderlies, who had often found Tracy prickly but ultimately on their side, shook their heads. The doctors, many of whom owed their smoothly run schedules to her, were apprehensive. In the administrative pool, the reaction was a complex cocktail of shock, sadness, and a furtive, unspoken opportunism. Tracy's chair, the one that commanded the anteroom to the most powerful office on the premises, was now empty. The first to be anointed as Tracy's successor was a young woman named Chloe. Where Tracy had been seasoned and sharp-edged, Chloe was all bright-eyed ambition and polished potential. She had an MBA, spoke the language of synergy and value-added deliverables, and had impressed Sable with her enthusiastic embrace of his new digital systems. She was, in many ways, everything he believed the modernized hospital administration needed. Chloe's arrival was met with a wave of cautious optimism. She was friendly, approachable, and eager to prove herself. For the first few weeks, she worked tirelessly, often staying long after the other admin staff had gone home. She mastered the new filing system, streamlined the chief's email inbox with a complex series of filters, and even organized a highly successful, morale-boosting potluck for the department. But the role of gatekeeper to the chief of staff required more than efficiency and good intentions. It required a kind of political sixth sense, a deep, almost primal understanding of the hospital's complex ecosystem. This was a wisdom Tracy had earned through years of navigating conflicts, smoothing egos, and remembering which cardiologist couldn't be scheduled in or next to which anesthesiologist due to a decade-old grudge. It was knowledge that lived not in a database, but in her bones. Chloe's first major misstep was with Dr. Julian Andrews, the brilliant, tempestuous, and notoriously proud head of cardiothoracic surgery. Dr. Andrews had a standing, albeit unofficial, understanding with the previous chiefs. When he needed an emergency slot for a transplant or a critical bypass, he got it, no questions asked. The system was simply bypassed, and Tracy would handle the fallout, her sharp tongue and unwavering confidence enough to reschedule less critical procedures and placate irritated colleagues. One Tuesday afternoon, a donor heart became available. It was a race against time. Dr. Andrews burst into the admin anteroom, still in his scrubs, his eyes blazing with urgency. "Chloe, I need an OR. Now. The new hybrid suite. Clear it and get my team prepped," he barked, already turning to leave, assuming his command would be obeyed as it always had been. Chloe, however, was a slave to the system. The hybrid suite was booked for a complex, but non-life-threatening, electrophysiologist study led by Dr. Imani Reed. In Chloe's digital calendar, a booking was a binding contract. "I'm sorry, Dr. Andrews," she said, her voice polite but firm, "but the hybrid suite is occupied by Dr. Reed's team until 5 p.m. According to the protocol, emergency procedures are to be routed through the ER's overflow ORs. I can check availability for you there." Dr. Andrews stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, his face a mask of incredulous fury. "The overflow ORs don't have the equipment I need for this transplant. The hybrid suite does. This isn't a suggestion, young lady. A man's life is on the line. Clear the suite." "I understand the urgency, Doctor," Chloe replied, her training in conflict resolution failing her utterly in the face of raw, medical imperative. "But without following the proper chain of command and obtaining an official override from Mr. Sable or the head of surgery, I'm not authorized to disrupt a scheduled procedure. It could create a significant liability." The word liability hung in the air like a bad smell. To Dr. Andrews, it was an obscenity in that context. He didn't bother arguing further. He stormed past her, threw open Sable's door without knocking, and a shouting match ensued that could be heard throughout the entire floor. The heart was transplanted, Dr. Andrews won the battle, but it was done amid chaos, resentment, and a formal complaint from Dr. Reed about the disruptive and unprofessional last-minute cancellation of her procedure. Sable was forced to spend valuable political capital smoothing things over. He had hired Chloe for her adherence to protocol, but in this critical moment, her rigidity had nearly cost a life and had certainly damaged interdepartmental relations. He spoke to her about exercising discretion and understanding the spirit, not just the letter, of the law. Chloe, chastened and confused, tried to adjust. But the incident had shaken her confidence. Her downfall, however, was ultimately financial. Eager to prove her value and make her mark, she took on a project to renegotiate the hospital's contract with its linen service. Tracy had always handled this, and she had a famously good relationship with the family-owned company that had supplied GH for 30 years. They weren't the cheapest, but they were reliable, their quality was exceptional, and they had always been willing to accommodate emergency deliveries. Chloe, armed with spreadsheets and cost-benefit analyses, put the contract out to competitive bid. She found a larger, corporate supplier that undercut the old company's price by 15%. It was a huge savings on paper. She presented the finding to Sable, who was impressed. He authorized the switch, seeing it as a clear win for his cost-cutting initiative. The disaster was not immediate, but it was inevitable. The new supplier's linens were of a lower thread count, prone to tearing and pilling. More critically, their delivery logistics were inflexible. A massive shipment of contaminated linens arrived, leading to an infection control scare that locked down 2 entire wards for a day. Then, a truck breakdown meant the ER ran out of sterile gowns during a multi-car accident triage, forcing staff to improvise in a way that was both unsafe and demoralizing. The cost of the disruptions, the overtime paid to the laundry staff to manage the crisis, and the potential liability from the infection scare dwarfed the 15% savings. The chief of nursing, a formidable woman named Amy Lansing, marched into Sable's office and delivered a blistering assessment of the situation, ending with, "I don't care what your spreadsheets say, Martin. My nurses are fighting a war on the floors, and you just took away their reliable ammunition. This is what happens when you let a child play with things she doesn't understand." Sable was a numbers man, and the numbers were now unequivocally bad. The human cost was one thing, but the financial cost was a language he understood perfectly. Chloe had failed. She was called into his office. This time, the view seemed even colder. He didn't yell. He simply laid out the data, the financial loss, the operational disruptions, the damage to staff morale. "You were brought in to mitigate risk and improve efficiency, Chloe," he said, his tone weary. "The data indicates your decisions have had the opposite effect. I no longer have confidence in your strategic judgment." Chloe was dismissed. Her departure was quieter than Tracy's, accompanied by a sense of disappointment rather than shock. She had been given the crown, but the throne had proven too large, the responsibilities too deeply rooted in the hospital's complex, beating heart for her textbook knowledge to manage. The search for a replacement became more urgent. The admin pool was now gripped by a superstitious dread. The job was seen as cursed. Sable, determined not to make another mistake, looked for someone with experience, someone who wouldn't be cowed by the strong personalities of the medical staff. He promoted from within, selecting a senior administrator named Ben Carter. Ben was the antithesis of Chloe. He was in his late 40s, had been at General Hospital for 15 years, and knew its corridors and its politics intimately. He was affable, respected, and possessed a calm, unflappable demeanor. He was a known quantity. Surely, he would be the steady hand needed to calm the waters. For a time, it seemed Sable had finally found his solution. Ben moved into the role with seamless ease. He knew all the players, understood the unwritten rules, and was liked by everyone from the porters to the department heads. He managed Dr. Andrews with a quiet word and a knowing smile. He smoothed over the linen fiasco by personally calling the owner of the old supplier and, through a combination of charm and apology, managed to reinstate them, albeit at a slightly higher rate. The chaos began to subside. Ben's strength was his deep integration into the hospital's social and political fabric. It was also his fatal flaw. He had been at GH for so long that his loyalties were deeply enmeshed in a web of old friendships, favors owed, and unspoken alliances. Tracy had been fiercely loyal to the office of the Chief of Staff. Ben was loyal to the people of General Hospital, and sometimes those two loyalties were in direct conflict. The crisis began subtly. A memo from Sable outlining a new policy requiring all department heads to justify their staffing budgets line by line, with an eye toward potential right-sizing, landed on Ben's desk. It was a classic corporate move, one that Sable had used successfully in his previous roles. At a private hospital chain, it was standard procedure. At General Hospital, a place still clinging to a sense of being a family, it was a declaration of war. Ben knew the uproar this would cause. He knew the department heads, many of whom were his friends, would see it as a profound insult, a sign that Sable trusted neither their judgment nor their dedication. He believed, perhaps correctly, that such a heavy-handed approach would trigger a mutiny, possibly even causing valued senior staff to leave. So, Ben made a decision. He would soften the blow. He took the memo and, before distributing it, added a paragraph of his own, a preamble that sought to frame the request as a collative resource assessment and a chance to showcase the critical value of our teams. His intention was to sand down the edges of Sable's corporate speak. It was a well-intentioned act of mediation. But he didn't stop there. He personally called a few of his closest friends among the department heads, including the chief of nursing, Amy Lansing, and gave them a heads up, assuring them that he would run interference and that it was mostly a bureaucratic exercise. He was trying to manage the fallout before it happened. What he failed to understand was that for Martin Sable, control of information was control of power. The unedited memo was not just a set of instructions, it was a test of authority, a deliberate provocation to see who would push back and how. Sable wanted the raw, unfiltered reaction. Ben's attempts to mediate were, in Sable's eyes, an act of sabotage. The situation came to a head when Amy Lansing, armed with Ben's reassuring context, attended the department head meeting. When Sable brought up the new budget justification process, she was prepared. Instead of the outburst of anger Sable had expected, she was coolly dismissive. "We understand the need for fiscal responsibility, Martin," she said, her tone diplomatic but firm. "Ben gave us the background on this initiative. My nursing managers are already stretched to their breaking point. Having them spend dozens of hours justifying positions we all know are essential is a poor use of their time and a quick way to burn out good people. Perhaps we can find a more collaborative way to achieve your goals." Sable's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Ben gave you the background?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The room went still. Everyone sensed the shift. Amy, realizing her misstep, simply nodded. "He was trying to be helpful, I'm sure." After the meeting, Sable returned to his office. He didn't say a word to Ben, who was sitting at his desk. He simply closed his door. He spent the next hour pulling digital logs of Ben's communications and making quiet, discreet phone calls. He discovered the altered memo and the series of calls to department heads. He saw not a peacemaker, but a conspirator, not a loyal subordinate, but a rival power center. Ben's termination was the most chilling of all. There was no discussion of protocols or financial losses. Sable called him in and presented his findings with the cold finality of a judge passing a sentence. "You undermined a direct executive directive," Sable said, his voice flat and hard. "You altered official communications and engaged in a campaign of behind-the-scenes lobbying against my stated policies. In any organization, this is insubordination. In this one, it's a betrayal of trust that I cannot and will not tolerate. Your actions demonstrate that your primary allegiance is not to this office, but to a shadow government of your own making. Effective immediately, your employment with General Hospital is terminated. Security will see you out." Ben was too stunned to even argue. He had thought he was saving the hospital from itself. He had misjudged the nature of his new role entirely. He walked out of the office, past the now notorious empty desk, a ghost in a place he had called home for 15 years. 3 firings. 3 different people. 3 different failures. Tracy, the old guard, too set in her ways to bow to a new master. Chloe, the bright future, too green and rigid to understand the human reality behind the systems. Ben, the seasoned insider, too entangled in the old ways to serve the new regime with absolute loyalty. The pattern was clear to everyone. The chair outside Martin Sable's office was no longer just a job, it was a trial by fire, a test that, so far, everyone had failed. A superstitious dread settled over the administrative staff. Whispers of the cursed chair began to circulate. Who would be foolish enough to try for it now? In the quiet that followed Ben's departure, the real work of the hospital went on. Doctors operated, nurses cared for patients, lives were saved and lost. But in the administrative heart, a deep-seated anxiety had taken root. The firings were not just about individual failure, they were symptoms of a larger sickness, a fundamental clash between the soul of a traditional, community-focused hospital and the cold, hard logic of modern corporate medicine. Martin Sable sat in his quiet office, the cityscape sprawling before him. He had removed 3 obstacles, yet he felt no closer to control. The hospital was a living organism, and it was resisting him at every turn. He needed someone who could bridge the divide, someone who understood his systems but also spoke the language of the hospital's heart. But as he looked out at the sprawling complex of General Hospital, its lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk, he wondered if such a person existed. Or if the institution itself would continue to consume those who tried to command it from his chair, leaving behind only the ghosts of the fired and the ever-present, unyielding rhythm of life and death that no memo, no protocol, and no chief of staff could ever truly control. The battle for the soul of General Hospital was far from over, it had merely claimed its latest casualties. Tracy Quartermain has always been a force of nature on General Hospital, a woman who has commanded respect, fear, and admiration in equal measure. For decades, she has been the backbone of the Quartermain family, often running their empire with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. So when the shocking spoilers began to circulate that Tracy had been fired, viewers were stunned. This is not just any character being written off or shuffled aside, this is Tracy, a legacy figure whose influence in Port Charles is unmatched. The very idea that she could lose her position and be forced to face the consequences of her own manipulations left fans buzzing. Was this really the end of her reign? Could someone like Tracy ever truly be dethroned? And perhaps most importantly, what ripple effects would this firing create across the canvas of General Hospital? Because in Port Charles, no fall from grace is ever small, and Tracy's exit from power was bound to set the stage for even more chaos. The rumors swirling about Tracy's firing suggest that her downfall was not simply due to one poor decision, but rather a culmination of schemes that finally caught up to her. Tracy has never been shy about pulling strings or bending the rules to get what she wants. Whether it's within ELQ, her family's company, or her personal dealings with the likes of Brooke Lynn, Ned, or even Olivia, Tracy has long thrived on manipulation. But every reign eventually meets its limit, and Tracy's enemies had been stacking up quietly. The whispers suggest that her firing was orchestrated behind the scenes by people who had grown tired of her dominance. The board of ELQ, allies who felt betrayed, and even her own family members may have played a role in ensuring that Tracy no longer had the control she once wielded. For a woman as proud and unapologetic as Tracy, losing her power is equivalent to losing her identity, and this blow is one she may not easily recover from. But the story doesn't stop with Tracy. The spoilers indicate that she won't be the only one to fall victim to this wave of dismissals. In fact, 2 more individuals are said to be facing the exact same fate, creating a domino effect that shakes up Port Charles in ways few could have anticipated. For viewers, this raises the stakes considerably. Who else is on the chopping block? Is this a corporate purge at ELQ, or is it something bigger, something that reaches into the hospital itself or other corners of the town? When one power player falls, it often destabilizes the entire balance, and soon others find themselves caught in the storm. Tracy may have been the first to be ousted, but she certainly won't be the last. As speculation grows, fans have begun pointing fingers at several possible candidates for the next 2 firings. Some believe that Ned could be targeted, especially since his relationship with Tracy has always been complicated. If he had any involvement in her downfall, he might find himself burned by the very fire he helped to light. Others point toward Valentine, who has long had a hand in ELQ and has made his fair share of enemies. Could his underhanded dealings finally backfire, causing him to lose his footing as well? Then there are those who suspect the firings may extend beyond ELQ entirely, reaching into the hospital. After all, General Hospital thrives on drama, and a shake-up in the hospital administration could be just as explosive as a power struggle in the corporate world. If that's the case, names like Portia, Finn, or even Austin might be in the firing line, each for their own reasons. What makes these spoilers particularly juicy is the uncertainty surrounding the motivations behind these firings. Are they all connected, or is it simply a coincidence that 3 key figures are losing their positions one after another? If it's connected, then it suggests a larger conspiracy at play, someone pulling strings behind the scenes to remake the power dynamics in Port Charles. Could this be the work of a returning villain? Cyrus Renaud has certainly been known to destabilize entire institutions for his own gain, and with his presence lingering in the background, it wouldn't be shocking to discover he was orchestrating things from the shadows. Or perhaps this is the work of an insider, someone like Brooke Lynn, who has been learning the ropes of manipulation from her grandmother. If Tracy was teaching her the tricks of the trade, maybe Brooke Lynn is now putting those lessons to use against her. Tracy's firing also brings up questions about how the Quartermain family will react. The Quartermains are infamous for their infighting, but they also rally together when an outsider threatens one of their own. The twist here is that Tracy may have brought this downfall upon herself, meaning her family could be divided on whether to support her or let her face the consequences. Brooke Lynn, who has grown closer to her grandmother in recent months, may feel compelled to defend her, while Ned could see this as an opportunity to finally step out of Tracy's shadow. Olivia, always the voice of reason, may try to mediate, but her efforts could prove futile if long-held resentments bubble to the surface. Watching the Quartermaines implode while external forces close in is exactly the kind of soapy drama General Hospital fans live for, and these spoilers suggest that we're in for an emotional ride. For Tracy herself, being fired forces her to confront her vulnerabilities in a way she rarely has. This is a woman who has built her entire life around control and authority. Without her position, she may begin to question who she is outside of the power structures she has always commanded. Does Tracy even know how to exist without pulling the strings? Or will this be the moment that forces her to reinvent herself, perhaps in a more sympathetic light? It's hard to imagine Tracy ever being a victim, but soap operas have a way of taking even the most ruthless characters and showing cracks in their armor. Fans may find themselves unexpectedly rooting for her as she claws her way back from disgrace.